On December 13th, 2000, 7 inmates were just one step away from pulling off the boldest move of their lives. Freedom was within reach, until something completely unexpected happened. One twist turned the entire plan upside down. Most prison break stories around the world have one thing in common: fear. But this one? This was something else entirely. This was pure, unfiltered terror. Today, we're diving into one of the wildest and most daring prison escape attempts in modern history. And no, this isn't your typical story about digging a tunnel under the ground or scaling some crazy high fence in the dead of night. This was a clear-cut plan, executed in broad daylight, right under the guards' noses, with one simple rule: either we make it out, or we die trying. And here's what makes it even more terrifying. The mastermind behind the whole thing wasn't just another criminal. He was an inmate serving 18 life sentences. So don't expect a story with a typical ending, because this one ends with a serious shock. But before we jump into the details of what actually went down, there's something you need to understand about prisons and how they're classified. It'll help you grasp just how insane this escape attempt really was. Ever since prisons were invented, inmates have been trying to escape. It happens almost every day somewhere in the world, but we only ever hear about the ones that worked. This story? It's in a category of its own. It all happened in the country with the most heavily guarded prison system on Earth, the United States of America, and more specifically, in one of the harshest types of prisons there is, a supermax facility. Prisons are supposed to reform and discipline people, not torture them. Freedom, according to the hierarchy of human needs, is one of the most valuable things a person can have. For some, it's worth more than food or comfort. So when someone commits a crime, they're punished on a scale, starting from a fine or community service and going all the way to life imprisonment or even the death penalty, depending on the crime. Now let's talk about the different types of prisons. The first and most common type is a correctional facility. These are found all over the world. The goal is to rehabilitate the inmate, not just lock them up. The prisoner loses their freedom for a set amount of time, during which they're expected to attend educational or religious programs and do cleaning or work duties under professional supervision. The idea is that they'll walk out a better person. Countries like Denmark, Finland, and Norway are known for doing this really well. The second type is a high-security prison, like the infamous Alcatraz, where one of the most famous escapes in history happened. The prison in our story today falls into this category. These supermax facilities usually hold inmates with life sentences or those on death row. There's no rehab here, no hope for second chances. These people are left to die behind concrete and steel. Living conditions are brutal, and even the meals are calculated to the last calorie. And you'll see exactly what that means in just a bit. Then there's the third type, interrogation prisons, or what some call black sites. Take Saidnaya prison in Syria, for example. These are places where political prisoners, spies, or criminal masterminds are held. Conditions are unbearable, and the interrogations never stop. Many who go in never come back out. They either die from torture or from pure neglect. And if you're brave enough and really want to see what nightmares look like, go look up Saidnaya prison. But don't do it before bed. And finally, there's a fourth type, one nobody talks about. The most terrifying of them all, experimental prisons. In these places, inhumane scientific tests are done on real people, experiments that are internationally banned. Back in the day, the Soviets and the Japanese were notorious for this. The Japanese even had a horrifying research unit known as Unit 731, where they used Chinese prisoners as living lab rats before World War II. Believe it or not, some of these facilities might still exist around the world. There's no solid proof, of course, but plenty of rumors. Some even claim that Area 51 in Nevada is one of them. A secret site where experiments happen that go beyond anything the world has ever seen, but no one really knows for sure. Because just getting close to that place could cost you your life. Now, let's go back to supermax prisons, which are at the heart of today's story. You might remember that line we mentioned earlier. The food is carefully calculated. That wasn't just about nutrition. It meant much more than that. In these prisons, inmates aren't fed to stay strong or live normal lives. They're fed just enough to stay weak and broken. Meals are extremely limited, often stripped of carbs and sugar. Some facilities even add chemical substances to the food that cause constant fatigue and weakness. In one chilling interview with a survivor from Saydnaya prison, he revealed that prisoners were literally dropping dead from starvation, daily. Their daily food ration? 20 grains of wheat. That's it. The goal wasn't to nourish them, it was to keep them barely alive, so they didn't have the physical or mental strength to even think about rebellion or escape. And among the prisons that follow this brutal system is John B. Connolly Unit, the very place where our story unfolds. This prison, named after a former U.S. Treasury Secretary, or more accurately, after the position, not the man, is located in Texas. It's considered one of the most secure supermax prisons in the entire country. Every inmate there is either serving a life sentence or is on death row. The facility itself is a fortress, surrounded by 3 layers of fencing, each separated by 5 meters of space, all monitored by thermal cameras that never stop scanning. Guard towers are positioned everywhere. Officers are armed, locked, and loaded. If a riot breaks out, live ammo is allowed. But there's a rule. No more than 5% of the rioters can be killed. So if 100 inmates are involved, the guards are legally allowed to shoot 5. That's the policy. But even that doesn't paint the full picture. Inside, it gets even darker. Food? Almost non-existent. Treatment? Brutal to the point of torture. And the worst part? Violence is built into the system. Inmates kill each other under the eyes of the guards, sometimes with their full cooperation. Deadly deals are made behind those walls. Guards cut shady deals with gang leaders inside the cells. A guard might say, "Take out that guy, and I'll give your crew extra food for 2 days." And it happens, over and over again. In return, gangs might ask the guards to look away for just 15 minutes. Act like you didn't see anything. Just give us a quarter of an hour. They lure the target to work in the laundry room, and he never walks out. Just like in the movies, except worse. Here's a rule of thumb. No matter how wild movies get, they're usually just a reflection of some very real nightmare. And of course, these killings don't come free. Guards are paid huge bribes for allowing them. In short, Connolly is hell on earth. Once you're in, you're basically dead already. Every inmate there has a date with fate. Some are executed officially. Others are taken out in ways no one could imagine. And here's another disturbing fact. This prison sits in a remote desert region. It's surrounded by constant patrols, armed units scanning the perimeter day and night. Even if someone somehow managed a miracle escape, they wouldn't get far. Every single escape attempt has failed. Every one except one. Back in 1989, a prisoner managed to escape with help from a few corrupt guards, but he didn't make it far. Within 2 hours, armed units caught up with him and shot him dead on the spot. His body was delivered back to the prison in front of everyone, as a warning to anyone else even thinking about running. Bottom line? If you want to escape from a place like Connolly, you need a plan that goes beyond human capability, something supernatural, maybe even magic. And that is exactly what George Rivas was going for. George, the mastermind behind the Connolly escape. And that's where it all begins. So buckle up, because the real story starts right now. George Rivas was born in 1970 and entered Connolly Unit in 1998. He was just 28 years old. And here's where the real shock kicks in. At that young age, George had already been sentenced to 18 life terms. This guy wasn't just a criminal. He was a walking encyclopedia of crime. He'd done it all: murder, robbery, human trafficking, black market organ sales, and more. Nobody really knows how he managed to commit all of that in such a short time. But one thing's for sure. He did it. He was caught in California, a state that had already abolished the death penalty. So instead of being executed, he was slammed with multiple life sentences and eventually transferred to Connolly, all the way in Texas. Why? Because he was deemed too dangerous for regular lockup. Now here's the thing. In a place like Connolly, surviving for more than 5 years is a miracle. From 1998 to 2000, George survived 22 assassination attempts inside the prison. That's 1 attempt per month. Why? Because he didn't join a gang. He was like a stray deer in a forest full of wolves. Everyone was hunting him. Everyone wanted him gone. But during that same time, George met another inmate, Joseph Garcia. He was just a year younger, also serving life. And he had something in common with George. Neither of them belonged to any gang, and both of them were desperate to get out of that hellhole. Joseph had already spent 8 years trying to figure out an escape plan. But in Connolly, that's like trying to dig your way out of a bank vault with a spoon. The walls are steel reinforced. The cells have no windows, and the place is a fortress, locked from every side. So there was no point in using traditional methods. But when George and Joseph started sharing ideas, they came to one conclusion. The only way out is with the help of the guards. But that was the most dangerous option of all. First problem? Neither of them had money, not a dime. Even if they somehow had $1 million, offering it to a guard would be next to impossible. One wrong move, one guard who didn't take the bait, and it'd all be over. They'd either be killed or spend the rest of their lives in unimaginable torment. It was all or nothing. Escaping Connolly was basically a suicide mission. But then, something clicked in George's mind. A plan started forming. It was like a single ray of light piercing through the cracks of hell. And it was based on bits and pieces of information he had picked up over the years. Here's what he knew. Fact 1. Connolly held around 3,000 inmates. Fact 2. There were no more than 400 guards. Fact 3. The prison was in the middle of nowhere, a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. And from there, the madness began to take shape. George said, "If we can trigger a full-scale riot and get all 3,000 inmates to rise up, we can create a level of chaos they can't control." They weren't planning to sneak out. They were planning to shake the entire prison to its core. A total uprising. Every cell, every inmate. And the goal? Within 2 hours, enough guards would be killed or taken hostage. The internal gates would be breached, and a pathway to freedom would be ripped open. The whole thing had to happen before special forces arrived from outside. Was it insane? Absolutely. But in a place like Connolly, it was the only shot they had. At first glance, George and Joseph's plan seemed brilliant, but in reality, it was nearly impossible. Was it clever? Absolutely. If they could trigger a riot in a prison housing 3,000 inmates, the sheer panic might send the guards running. And reinforcements? They'd take at least 2 hours to arrive. In that time, the inmates could tear down walls and disappear into the desert. And even if backup showed up, how do you stop 3,000 men running wild across the plains? You don't. But genius or not, the plan hit a wall. Fast. The first obstacle? How do you convince 3,000 prisoners to join your plan without a single word leaking to the guards? Because prisons like Connolly are crawling with snitches. Every word is dangerous. Even if the message spreads, most inmates would respond, "What if I'm the first to get shot? What if this fails?" These weren't strong, fearless men. They were starved, exhausted, broken. Men who could barely stand, let alone riot. And worst of all, guards were legally allowed to kill up to 5% of inmates during a riot. That's 150 dead bodies within minutes. Anyone could be the first to fall. The plan collapsed before it ever got off the ground. But then, just like every great prison break story, hope showed up where no one expected it. George and Joseph didn't give up. They were certain there had to be a way out, even if it seemed impossible. Joseph had been planning for 10 years. George had spent 2 years observing, analyzing, testing. Their belief never wavered. There's no such thing as a prison without a flaw. And finally, they found that flaw. It was the maintenance workshop, a separate building, barely guarded, forgotten by the system. Workers rotated constantly, and most importantly, it had vehicles and equipment inside. It wasn't connected to the cells. It didn't have the same tight security. Suddenly, the escape plan snapped into focus. If we can reach the maintenance workshop and dress like the workers, we might just walk out the front gate. But there was a major problem. They needed a team. And in a place like Connolly, forming a team was like petting a wild tiger. Everyone hated everyone. Trust didn't exist. Worse still, George and Joseph were outsiders. No gang, no protection, no respect. But Joseph didn't stop. He launched his own mission: find the misfits, men like him, isolated, rejected, hopeless. Because deep down, even the most broken man hides a burning desire: freedom. So he started approaching the loners, the abandoned ones, the guys no one messed with because they had nothing, guys who didn't belong to a gang, who barely got food, who slept with one eye open. And slowly, piece by piece, the team began to form. They had nothing to lose. Most were on death row or had life sentences. They were healthy, desperate, and ready to die, for one shot at life. And finally, the crew was complete. George Rivas, Joseph Garcia, Larry Harper, Michael Rodriguez, Randy Halperin, Patrick Murphy, Donald Newberry, 7 men, 7 chances, 1 plan. Date: December 13th, 2000. Time, 11 a.m. The recess bell rang, just like every day. The team split into 2 groups. Group 1, George, Patrick Murphy, Larry Harper, and Donald Newberry. Their job: infiltrate the maintenance workshop and take control. At exactly 11:20 a.m., they made their move. Quiet. Focused. on script. And then, something miraculous happened. First, the workshop door was wide open, no lock at all. Second, the place was completely empty, not a soul inside. They were ready for a fight, ready to take hostages, ready for blood. But instead, silence. And for all their precise planning, they froze. The silence threw them off. It was too easy, too perfect. Confused and cautious, they made the hardest call: retreat. But this wasn't a failure. This was the beginning of something bigger. At that moment, the tension peaked. They'd been bracing for a fight, an ambush, gunfire. But instead, they found nothing. The workshop was empty, completely silent. And in moments like that, the human brain doesn't care if the surprise is good or bad, it just freezes. Panic kicked in. They stared at each other. What are we doing? Are we insane? Is this suicide? But then, they snapped back into action. They searched the workshop fast. And then came the second surprise. Brand new maintenance uniforms, still in their plastic wrapping. No hesitation. They put them on. 11:50 a.m., the second team entered the workshop. They were expecting chaos, blood, screaming, maybe even bodies. But instead, silence. No guards, no yelling. Just the first team, fully dressed as workers, waiting. So they changed clothes too. And then, they waited. Suddenly, footsteps. The next phase had begun. Phase 2, capture as many guards as possible, without firing a single shot. The first guard walked in. He saw what looked like regular workers at their stations. He approached casually. "Hey fellas, what are you doing in here?" One of them replied, cool and calm. "Electrical fault. We're fixing it." The guard nodded. "Where's the fault?" They pointed toward the control room. He stepped inside. That's when the trap was sprung. All 7 men jumped him. They tackled, tied, and stripped him of his weapon. And just like that, the guards' weapons, meant to uphold order, became tools of the escape. Then it happened again and again. 7 guards walked in, 7 were captured, 0 shots fired. The hall, 7 handguns, 4 shotguns, 100 extra rounds. Not including what was already loaded, every guard was tied up. Some were knocked out cold inside the control room. Then, Phase 3 began. Take control of the back gate. After months of surveillance, George and Joseph discovered something crucial. That gate was flanked by 2 fences, not 3 like the rest of the prison. More importantly, it was the employee exit. Workers left through it every day. To a guard, a maintenance van leaving, nothing suspicious. That gate was the key. The team split up again. 3 of them headed to the workshop garage, retrieved a maintenance truck. The other 4, they slipped toward 2 guard towers overlooking the back gate. Disguised as electrical workers, 2 approached each tower. Same tactic. Get close. 1 clean strike. Guard down. Tied. Disarmed. It all happened in seconds. The towers weren't fully exposed, which worked to their advantage. Finally, they regrouped at the workshop door, loaded up into the truck. It was all in motion now. Phase 4, the final push. They had one mindset. We make it out, or we die trying. The truck rolled toward the back gate, and then the unbelievable happened. No alarms, no shouting, no bullets, so the guard opened the gate without even looking at their faces. It was just before noon. The van eased through the 2 fences and drove away. No questions, no resistance, not even a second glance. Like ghosts, they vanished. Behind them, Connolly Unit, completely unaware that 7 of America's most dangerous men had just disappeared. The craziest part? The prison didn't even realize they were gone for 4 hours. 4 hours head start. By then, they could have been halfway across Texas. And now, you're probably caught in the story. Maybe you rooted for them. Maybe you wanted them to win. But don't forget, these weren't underdogs. They weren't misunderstood heroes. They were killers, rapists, master criminals. You were supposed to hope they failed. But somehow, they didn't. They escaped from one of the most secure prisons in the U.S., a place where the government sends people it wants erased. Yet 7 men, just 7, walked out like it was nothing. After escaping one of the most secure prisons in America, they stopped for gas. Just like that. No disguises, no panic. Just 7 of the country's most dangerous men at a gas station, filling up like they'd just left a shopping mall, not a maximum security fortress. Then they kept driving until they reached downtown Kennedy. And that's when reality hit them. Yes, they escaped. But the real question was, now what? They only had $75 stolen from the guards' pockets. They spent $12 on gas, now down to $53 for 7 men, fugitives with no plan. That's when Patrick Murphy, one of the escapees, snapped. Let's go back. We should turn ourselves in. We can't survive out here. The others stared at him. Silence, then rejection. They ditched the getaway car in a garage and stole another one. They drove deep into the countryside. At that point, Joseph pulled a trick from his book. They changed clothes into civilian outfits stolen earlier from the prison workshop. Joseph approached a local man and spun a story. We're just hippies, traveling, living free. The man believed him. He even helped. Took them to someone who rented out a small house. And from that house began the next phase. Survive, at any cost. This was their moment. They could have disappeared, started over, become someone else. But they didn't. They were still criminals, still a gang. Night 1. They robbed a store to pay rent. Then they moved towns, kidnapped people, robbed more shops for 40 days. The outskirts of Kennedy lived in terror because a group that broke out of prison like it was a game believed they could steal anything. 2 days before New Year's Eve, 2000, they made a move that would change everything. They stormed a gun store, held everyone at gunpoint, and stole 40 high-powered rifles, 8,000 rounds of ammo, $70,000 in cash. Then they committed the act that flipped the entire country upside down. They killed Officer Aubrey Hawkins. That was the final straw. The United States went into full lockdown. One of the biggest manhunts in U.S. history was launched, and it worked. The police captured 4 of them in the first raid. The remaining 3 followed soon after. The last to fall? Patrick Murphy and Joseph Newberry. But the twist? They weren't caught by force. They reached out to a local news station, Kiki TV, and offered to surrender on one condition. We'll only turn ourselves in on live television. And believe it or not, that's exactly what happened. They surrendered inside the station, on live broadcast, in front of the world. Then came the real shock. They stood in front of the cameras and declared, "We're not criminals. We're victims. From day 1, we wanted to come back, but we knew we'd be killed. The prison system is corrupt. It gave us no choice. We stole because we had to survive. But their corruption is worse than ours." The public exploded. Calls for their release. Massive sympathy. Some even called them heroes. But it didn't last. 1 month later, the noise faded, the headlines changed, and the 7 men were forgotten. Their fates, all sentenced to death. First execution, 2003, last one, 2024, and just like that, one of the most legendary prison escapes in U.S. history was closed. They said, "No one escapes Connolly Unit, not even the devil." But 7 men did, and they did it in style. This was our story for today. If you liked it, I highly recommend you check out the legendary escape from Alcatraz, an escape not through desert, but straight through the ocean. Or listen to the Hollywood-style prison break that will blow your mind with every twist. Now tell me in the comments, was the death penalty fair, or were they victims of a broken system? See you in the next video.